I'm just going to do a very brief overview of the basic principles of lobbying. And then I have my two colleagues up here. Lynne is going to talk about some of the actual lobbying that we did, and Ahmed here is going to talk about, pick up all the things that we dropped and develop them in much greater detail. And he's actually had a tremendous amount of experience with it. With that said, the League of Women Voters developed this little, very simple handout, and it had in there 5 points. I added 2 more, a 0 point at the beginning, and I'm going to start with that. The 0 point is before you do anything else, before you even get into this, you need to register and to vote. Registering and voting is the absolute gateway to any of this, not just to lobbying, but to political power. And I'll tell you a little story. At one point, I got involved in political causes in my town, and I would go around from door to door doing things. And there were politicians that I was trying to get elected, and we would sit down and we would go over literally every voter in the town. And we had sheets. Here's a sheet right here. And on that sheet, you can get them, they're public sheets, they come from the election board. They have the voting history of every voter in the town. It doesn't record how you voted. We don't know who you cast a ballot for, but we can tell by looking at that whether you voted, and if so, and what party you're registered for. I see here, for example, Howard Hubbard, he's a bishop in Albany. And I can see that from this list that he is unaffiliated, and he voted in all 3 of the last general elections, but not in the primaries, because he's unaffiliated. Now that tells me something about who this guy is. And at one point I looked at my walk sheet and I saw on it that there was a Job Corps down the street, and there's 150 people in there that were both registered to vote. And I said, wow, we should go down and make a big production down there and sort of, get everybody excited about this. And the politician looked at me and said, don't waste your time, they don't vote. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, just look at the sheet. None of them have ever voted. They are all here for temporarily. They're going to go back somewhere else. They don't vote in elections. I'm not wasting my time with those people. And every politician thinks like that. If you don't vote, you're wasting their time. You're wasting your time if you get out of the office and talk to them, but you're also creating space. If you're in the Muslim community, for example, and nobody in the Muslim community votes and is registered, you're creating space for other people to come in and say things about the Muslim community, and the politician has to decide, who do I side with here? Do I side with the people who are saying bad things about the Muslim community and vote? Or do I side with people who are saying bad things about the Muslim, do I side with the Muslim community that I know is doing good things and don't vote? And if you're the politician, who would you side with? That's why registering and voting is so important. Not just you, but everybody in the mosque. Because every time you go down to see someone, to lobby or to do anything, and you say, I'm with you, I'm one of your constituents. And by the way, I worship at the mosque down here. You know the big one of the big parking lots, always full of cars? And we made it a point to register everybody in that mosque. I can't tell you who they're going to vote for, but I can tell you everybody in that mosque is registered. Do you know what political impact is? That's power. All of a sudden, bang, here's a legislator looking at 2,000 votes. And if he could somehow get down to that mosque and talk to the people and find out what they were interested in, okay, then he might get some of those 2,000 votes. If you don't vote in the election, well, I'm not wasting my time. So that's why the number one thing here is register and vote. You cannot get political power any better than that. But anyways, assuming you're registered and voting, one of the things, the first thing on the list here is politicians aren't interested in the opinions of people who can't vote for them. Basically what I've said. Identify yourself as a constituent of the legislature that you're contacting. And this is very important, and it happens to me all the time. I go down, I start to talk to some legislator, and he says, oh, by the way, what district are you in? And I say, well, I'm not quite sure. He says, well, don't come and talk to me until you know what district you're in, because what's the point? You know, I don't like to talk to people that I know can't vote for me. But, however, I will also say that sometimes if you bring a constituent down, it is helpful to bring some allies with you. An expert, someone who knows something about the law, someone who's had a particularly poignant story that illustrates the point you're making. Because you will get a lot more attention, A, if you are a constituent, but B, if you can tell a compelling story. One of the second topic says, whether writing or calling your legislator, focus on a single topic. You will be more effective and receive a faster response. And I think what we all have a tendency of doing is experiencing an injustice. We want to get on and talk to the legislator about it, and we tell them the whole story, or her. You know, here it is, this is this horrible story, you know, and you finish, and the legislature later will look at you and say, what do you want me to do about it? What's the point? Are you telling me this because you are looking for a psychiatrist? Are you telling me this because you're looking for comfort? Are you looking at me because you actually have legislation you want passed? Because that's what I do. If you're looking for legislation you want passed, you've come to the right place, but you got to tell me what it is. So that's why I think it's very helpful when you get down and talk there to focus yourself on what the legislator can do for you. What kind of legislation? And later on, Kathy's going to do a workshop on the kinds of legislation that I think we all would be interested in. And then on Monday, we're going to go out and actually do some lobbying down at the Capitol and practice it and see if you can sort of engage your particular legislator in a discussion about bills that would actually help the Muslim community. So that's one thing there. Number 3 is ask the legislature to take specific action like supporting a piece of legislation. Ask for a written response that gives your legislator's position on the issue. And I think it is very important to try to push them off of simply listening to you and saying, thank you for your opinion, I really appreciate that, and getting you out the door. Trying to get them to say, either they agree with you or they disagree with you, or what their position is on the particular legislative issue that you're asking them to do. Sometimes you are going to be up, and I know on Monday, because we've been talking with Kathy about it, some of the legislators we are talking to, who happen to be, you happen to be constituents of them, are people who are actually very hostile to the Muslim community, or, well, I won't say very hostile, no politician is very hostile, but certainly does not agree with a lot of the things that the Muslim community is looking for. And so to get that person to support legislation would be almost impossible. On the other hand, if you could move that person from absolutely under no circumstances would I vote for that bill to, you know, I think I understand what you're saying. I could remain neutral on this one. That is a huge victory, because moving someone from absolute opposition to simple neutrality allows other good things to happen by other people. So it's something to think about. Make your points quickly and concisely to have a greater impact. I guess I don't have to say anything more about that except to move on to the next topic, to be concise. When talking about an issue, it's best to use your own words. And certainly, you all have displayed that, I think, today in talking about your stories. You know your story, you are the expert on it, you can talk very effectively about it. And I just had a couple of other quick points that I wrote down. One of the things that is most important, I think, in lobbying is persistence. Being persistent. You go down, you walk in the first time, you talk to the person, and the person says, yeah, fine, okay, good, I got it, it's all good. And then nothing more happens. And a year goes by, and 2 years goes by, and I said, well, I talked to him. I talked to her. And nothing has happened. And that's because you got to follow up. You have to assume that these people don't have any more memory than 2 weeks. And they've completely forgotten about it. What in fact is going to happen is that you are going to go down on Monday and you are going to try to talk to your legislator. And instead of that, you're going to get a staff person. It always happens. They have staff people. And the staff person is actually a very powerful person. It's an important person because he's going to take the facts of the case and the details of it, and he's going to brief the legislator. And he's going to do it in a very concise way that makes sense to them. Sometimes when I'm briefing a staff person, I like to watch where they write. And sometimes as I'm telling the story, and the guy's just sort of sitting back there, he's not doing anything. No sign of any note-taking at all. And then suddenly I might say something like, and by the way, do you have any idea how much money the government is wasting by locking up all these Muslims? And suddenly, you see the pen fly, right? And you say, that's the issue that gets him, right? So you want to follow up with that. Send him some literature in the mail, or just deliver it down there, about how much it costs to lock people up, about the number of Muslims in his district that are locked up, and so on. You can support it that way. Send articles. Another thing is to offer him an opportunity to come to the mosque and talk to the mosque about his concerns about the amount of money that's being wasted. In other words, just keep coming back with different ways of engaging him or her with the issue. One of my favorite ways to do that, sometimes, if you have a favorable legislator, a legislator who says, oh yeah, I completely get it, I'm totally with you, I'm going to support you all the way down on this. But after about 6 months, he's completely forgotten about it, right? So go back to him and say, I know I talked to you before, you were really with us. Give me some strategy. Who do I need to move from no to yes? How do I get to that person? And then he sits down and starts to just tell you, who is the blockage? Who is the person that's causing the problems? Who do you need to get to? How do you move the bill forward? And then he gets re-engaged in it, or she gets re-engaged in it. So those are some ideas as to how to be persistent and how to make an impact with a legislator when you're down there. And I think the last thing I would say is simply that this is one of the great things you can do, engaging with the government by the constituents. And you have to go with an attitude, not that they're going to do a favor for you, but that they work for you. They work for you. You elected them, you put them in office, even if you didn't vote for them, and they serve you. You don't be rude about it, don't demand, don't be obnoxious. But go with that attitude of, I expect production out of you. I want to see some production, even if it means nothing more than moving from no to neutral. So with that, I'm going to just stop, and I'll turn it over to Lynne.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name is Lynne Jackson, and I'm from Albany, New York. So I'm going to talk about a few things about a resolution that we were able to get through the Albany City Council. But before I do that, I would just like to mention that Marlene Jenkins is here. Yeah, right here. And this is the movie T-Error. Are people familiar with this movie T-Error? Can I have a show of hands if people have heard about it? Okay. So this movie is about Lyric Cabral and David Sutcliffe followed around an FBI informant and filmed him as he was doing a sting operation, or whatever. And it's a really good movie. It just won an Emmy Award. And Marlene has brought many copies, so if you would like a copy, I can give you one. And I just want to let people know about this movie because I think it's really important to look at it. And I also really like the name, because of course it spells terror, but the T is in parentheses, so it's really an error that's going on. So I think it's excellent.
Netflix too.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
And can I just mention that it also shows NCPCF at one of its finer moments when we actually went down and had a press conference in Washington and denounced the FBI for the attempted sting here. And so it's interesting from that point of view also. It highlighted the work that NCPCF does.
There's a lot of
And it
interesting
highlights-
plot twists.
What?
There's a lot of interesting plot twists.
Yeah, a lot of interesting plot twists, and it highlights the case that Marlene's son went through, so.
Okay. The first thing I'd like to say is I would like to re-emphasize Steve's point that you need to register and you need to vote.
You and your friends.
You and your friends, everyone, because I know from personal experience, I live in an economically challenged ward in the city of Albany, and this ward is often ignored because nobody in my ward votes, and it makes me crazy. Never mind. And it makes me absolutely crazy because the politicians pay attention to people who vote, and if you don't vote, they're not going to pay attention to you. And just like what Steve said, the politicians don't know who you vote for, they don't know how you vote, but they know that you vote, and that's what's so important. The other thing I'd like to say is that party matters. You know, we have two dominant parties in this country, the Democrats, the Republicans. There seems to be a lot of media around the idea that there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. And I know people don't read party platforms, but there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans. The advantage of enrolling in a party is you get to vote twice, because first you get to vote in the primary, and then you get to vote in the general election. So you double your impact. So not only should you vote, you should make sure you're enrolled in a party and that you vote in the primary. Okay. Number one, who here knows the name of their congressman? Show of hands. It's pretty good. All right. So I'm just going to do this exercise with your congressman. Who here has a cell phone?
Everyone.
Okay. So what you do is you take out your cell phone. Right now, everybody take out their cell phone. And I want you to open a web browser. Okay, so take out your cell phone, open a web browser, and in the search bar, type in My Congressman. My Congressman. Okay, now what it's going to do is it's going to bring you to a list, and one of them is going to be house.gov. If you look at the URL, it's house.gov. And if you click on that, you will be able to type in your zip code, and the Google machine will give you your congressman's name. So, did you do that? Did you type in your zip code? How many people are having is everybody find the website?
Yes.
Okay, so who didn't know their congressman before and now knows the name of their congressman? Don't everyone talk at once. Hadaya.
Yes. And I met him before. You remember Steve? We met him in Dar al-Hikmah.
Yes, you're right.
So what's his name? John Conyers. Oh, he's your congressman?
Yes.
Oh my. John Conyers is a wonderful man, and you should be his friend.
And because what happened also, as Steve said, is give power to the Muslim. When he came and he told the Imam of the masjid, I just came from DC, from the airport. I don't want to Lansing. I just came to be here with you guys because they vote. That's masjid. They always involved in voting.
So he came to a particular masjid because they vote, right?
Yes.
So that just illustrated our point. You have to vote. Anybody else want to share their congressman's name? Yes. Say again?
District 6.
District 6. And what's the name again?
Grace May.
Grace May.
And May.
Okay.
Is it Chinese or in Asian?
Excellent. So now you know the name of your congresswoman.
And then the
Joseph Crowley.
Well, there's usually, you only get one congressman.
You're two in here.
Oh, it has two, all right.
District 14 and District 6.
All right.
I know her, the lady.
Oh, it gives
Excellent.
possible representatives depending on.
Right, because of the, you're putting in the email, the zip
Zip
code.
code, yeah.
Yeah, right, that's the full address, yeah.
One zip code could have be dividing the congressional district.
And in the back there.
Keith Ellison.
Oh.
Muslim, but not, he's not anti-CBD, which sucks.
Right.
Oh, I think he needs a little education on CBD,
You
right?
should talk to him about that.
You should, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk to him some more.
You can never talk enough.
Yeah.
Persistence.
All right, so now does everybody feel comfortable in knowing their congressman? Now, I don't want to ask personal questions, but is there anyone here who is eligible to vote, but hasn't registered yet and is now, as a result of this, going to go out and register to vote? Oh, I see some hands. Very good, very good. I expect you to email me when you have registered to vote so that I know you did it.
Well, and more to the point, is there anyone here who is going to organize a registration drive at your mosque and talk to your friends and make sure that all of them register? No hands at all? Come on, get the hands up. All right, got one. Any others?
Well, I don't belong to a mosque, but I will in my community.
All right, in your church, good.
Excellent.
Anybody else? Oh, come on, you guys.
What was the
This
question?
is a movement, what?
What was the question?
How many people here, as a result of this or at any other time, are going to organize a registration drive in your mosque? All right, good, thank you.
I just want to say, I don't belong to a mosque, and I organized voter registrations for 2 years at a mosque.
Yes, you did.
Just saying. So if you don't know how to do a voter registration guide, what do? You look up the League of Women Voters, and they will give you everything because they're wonderful people. So remember that, League of Women Voters. Write that down,
And it-
League of Women Voters.
It's right on the whole sheet there.
Yeah, it's on the sheet. So you just call up your local League of Women Voters, they'll give you everything. All right. Okay, so I just want to reiterate a little bit. I'm going to talk about what I did to get a resolution passed at the Albany City Council. And you may say, you know, why are you talking about a resolution that doesn't have force of law that I got passed at the Albany City Council? Well, for one thing, it's an example. But the other thing is that when you do this kind of thing, it's not only to get your legislators to vote right, but you want to make a big deal. You want people to know about this. You want people to understand what the issues are. So that's why it is really important to work on the local level, because also by working on the local level, it's a lot easier to know your local elected officials because they represent fewer people. You're more likely to meet them and talk to them. And eventually, some of those local officials may work their way up and become, you know, congressmen or something. So it is very important to work on a local level, is, you know, part of what I think. So the reason that we did this is we have a local Albany County legislator who really cares about the Yassin Aref Mohammed Hossein case, which is the case that Steve and Kathy and I first got involved with this issue. And he suggested that we go to this city and get the city council to pass a resolution in support of the two men. So what happened is that Steve and some other people researched some issues, and we came up with a resolution in terms of, that talked about exculpatory information, that, you know, information that defendants should be entitled to in these cases. And even though this is an issue, it's a federal issue, the idea was that we would get this resolution passed about this recommendation for defendants to be able to get exculpatory information, and we'd send it to our federal representatives to know that we're watching this issue. But the other thing that's important is to be able to make a big deal of it in terms of the public. So So what did I do? So the first thing I realized is a legislator has to be able to carry the legislation. So you have to figure out who can bring this legislation to the legislative body. Now in my case, at that time, my Common Council member was a man named Dominic Casolaro. Some of you may know him. And he really cared a lot about issues of civil liberties, and he was pretty appalled at what happened to Yasin and Mohammed. Now the reason that I knew Dominic is because I worked on his campaign. And that is something else you may want to consider doing, is that if you find a good candidate, there's no reason you can't work on the campaign. Because it's important to be involved, in the political process. So who here has worked on a campaign? Okay, that's a few people. Did anybody work on Bernie's campaign? Okay, right. Because getting involved and going, I know this has got to be pretty uncomfortable because, I grew up in a household where my mother was involved with legal voters and politics was a big deal. But if you're not used to it, it's a little hard to go out there. But I suggest use your wonderful, friendly personalities and go out there and meet people. Okay, so work on the campaign. So what I did is I met with Dominic Casolaro, and I wanted to bring with me something that legitimized my issue, that we wanted exculpatory information to be given to the defendants. And so what I did is, Shamshad Ahmad had written a book about our case. And even though he sells the books, he gave me a whole box of books to give to the Common Council members. So I brought a book with me. I met with Dominic and I asked him, please, would you carry this resolution to the Albany City Council? And I was quite surprised, even though Dominic has been very supportive of a lot of issues I brought to him, he said, I'll tell you in a few days, which was kind of interesting to me. Because the other thing about politicians you have to remember is not only do you ask them to do something, but you must support him when he goes and does things. So it's a two-way street. You can't just say, do this resolution and walk away. You have to support him in whatever efforts they're going to be to do the resolution. Anyway, to make a long story short, because I don't want to sit here forever, Dominic did say yes, and we changed the language. Steve was involved with that and other people to change the language of the resolution to make it something that Dominic felt he could get passed. And then I began the part that I needed to do, which was I met with many of the members of the Albany City Council. And in Albany, New York, the council has 15 members, which is a lot of people. But it's good. It's good to have a lot of people. And I think I ultimately met with about 8 of them. And most of them told me that, yes, they would support the resolution. You also need to understand the politics of your area. Albany, New York has no Republicans in it. There are no Republicans. They're only Democrats. So basically you work with right-wing Democrats and left-wing Democrats, because there's the progressive Democrats and then there's the regular Democrats. Anyway, so it does help to understand the politics. Like in Albany, the downtown wards are progressive and the uptown wards are not. So anyway, but it helps to understand that. But the most important thing about this was we wanted a lot of publicity, because we weren't going to just have the council just pass this and nobody noticed, because that was not a good thing. So fortunately, I won't go into all the details because these are things that you can learn. This is not rocket science. This is pretty simple, actually. In the Albany City Council, any person can come to the Albany City Council to any meeting and address the council for 5 minutes. And the council will allow that. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure the resolution passed. And so Dominic used a technique where he was going to introduce the resolution and then call for its passage the same night. So that way all of the publicity would focus on that one council meeting on that one night. So a group of us in Albany organized and invited a lot of people to come, and I think is Fatan Shanur in here? She was one of the people who came that night. So people came to, we made sure that like Maury Salakan and a lot of the people with the cases, you know, these cases that we knew at the time, knew about this meeting. And so we had people come and address the Common Council from as far away as Maryland, which is, you know, like a 7-hour drive, right? At the Albany City Council. So what we did is, we had a big rally in front of the pizza shop, the pizza shop that Mohammed Hossein had owned. We had a big rally, and then we marched from the pizza shop down to City Hall, and then we had to all go into City Hall. We had to go through the metal detectors, and the people at City Hall were not used to having all these people with the signs and, it was very interesting to go through all the metal detectors. Anyway.
And the hijabs. You don't see a lot of hijabs in city council meetings, which is unfortunate, but it's true. And this made a big impact on them. It's like, oh my gosh, we have a Muslim community that is coming down to engage us. We have to find out what's going on.
Yeah, I think Steve's point's really well taken, because they had never seen, there must have been at least 20, 30 hijabis that came out for that rally. And it just never, in Albany, New York, it just didn't happen. And that was really important, that people were identifiably Muslim who came down to that meeting. This is really important. Anyway, so what happened is, a lot of people signed up to speak, including 3 little kids. 3 little kids came. And they spoke about some of the young children just basically said, I want my daddy to come home. And there was not a dry eye in that house after people heard all those stories. And it was one of the most powerful meetings I think I have ever been to. And believe me, I've done a lot of politics. But to hear all these stories and all the reasons why this resolution was important and why this issue was important, it was incredible. And the Albany County Council did pass the resolution. What was really striking to me is that as the members were allowed to vote, the city council members began to tell their own stories of how they had suffered oppression and prejudice and racism. And it was really interesting to hear some of their stories. One of the Common Council members at that time had been born in Russia, and he came here as a teenager. And he said that to this day, his grandmother will not talk about politics because she lived through the Soviet Union, and you just couldn't talk about politics. You couldn't talk about, like she would never mention the president's name or anything like that. And it was really interesting to hear these stories of racism and prejudice that the Common Council members themselves had suffered. And this is important to remember, that they are actually people also. So we stayed until the very bitter end. The Common Council, many of the members gave very dramatic speeches, and the resolution did pass. At that point, we marched back up the hill, and we went to Mrs. Hossein's pizza shop. And she opened up the pizza shop and fed everybody. There must have been 150 people there in this little tiny room, a little tiny restaurant. The president of the Common Council said to me, now this woman and I have rarely agreed, and in a previous life I used to sue the city council a lot. And so we weren't, yeah, a lot. And so we never really saw eye to eye. We were never on the same page. And she said to me, Lynn, you know I've been in politics a long time. You know that I have heard many parents come to the Common Council meeting to advocate for their children, but I've never had little children come to the Common Council and ask for our help in getting their daddies back. And it was very powerful. The upshot of all this is that there's my husband took this beautiful photo of us marching down the hill to City Hall with all the signs and the banners. and it was beautiful. That was published in the Mideast, Washington, what was it, Washington?
Washington Report for Middle Eastern Affairs?
Yeah, Washington Report for Middle Eastern Affairs. We got it in all the newspapers, it was on all the TV stations, and I feel like we really made a big impact. And even though it was only local, it had no force of law, it was a way to bring people together and to really make people understand this extremely important issue. So, thank you very much for listening.
And what is it used for?
What, say again?
What is a resolution and what is it used for?
Oh, so what a resolution is, like for example, this one, I'll just start off
We
with,
have some samples up here, you can come up and help yourself.
yeah. So basically, there's two things a city legislative body can do. They can pass an ordinance, which is a law, or they can pass a resolution. So an ordinance, as the force of law, can be enforced by the police. A resolution is like a suggestion on what the council wants to do. Like, it could be a pretty strong suggestion, but it doesn't have the force of law. Because in this case, the city council doesn't have any control over the federal government giving up exculpatory evidence to a defendant. You know, the city council has they can't pass laws about that. But they can send a resolution saying, we care about this issue, and send it off to the congressmen and the senators, which is what they wanted to do with the resolution. To say, this is an important issue, we want you to look at it. So it's more of a suggestion, but it's important because sometimes you can't go directly from, we have an issue, we're going to make a law. But you can go from, we have an issue, we're going to make a resolution, and then maybe if we get enough support of that, we can get a law passed. Or we get a lot of, if a lot of city councils had passed our resolution, say, then maybe Congress might have looked at it when we had a Congress that actually worked. Oh, excuse me. Anyway, but so that's the difference between a resolution and an ordinance. And usually, it's basically a whole bunch of whereases. Like this one starts out, whereas the Declaration of Independence of the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights are the cornerstone of our democracy. So it kind of starts out with the basics. And then it goes on to the very end, it says, now therefore be it resolved. And that's where it says, this is what we want you to do. So it's a strong suggestion of how the local government feels about an issue.
Okay, thanks. No round of applause for Thank you. My name is Ahmed Bedier, and I am from Florida. I used to work for an organization called CARE. How many of you have heard of CARE? I'm sure many of you. And after leaving CARE, I started an organization called United Voices that's working on political empowerment of Muslims. And one of the reasons why I did that was because I realized during my tenure at CARE that we were acting as firefighters, advocating and defending civil liberties, but the civil liberties problems continued anyway. In fact, they kept increasing. And what I realized was that a lot of these issues was because of our lack of political participation. Had we had more political participation, more political clout, more political power, then these agencies would not be targeting our communities. The reason why they target our communities is because we're easy targets, we're sitting ducks, we're scapegoats. And when they target us, we can't do anything back to them because many of the people in our community are not even voting. And the government and politicians care about only two things: people who vote and people who give money for politicians. Both for really their re-election. Politicians care about staying in power, and they only care about people who keep them in power. So if you don't vote and if you don't give money within the system, whether you like it or not, then you don't count. And no matter what happens to you, for the most part, they're not going to stand up for you because you can't help them. So whether we can say, well, we don't like the system, or we like the system, or that's fair or unfair, that's the system that we have, and we have to work with it. Until there's a new system, this is all that we have. Now, these same politicians are partly responsible for many of the abuses or the policies that are being used to imprison and incarcerate unjustly your family members. Legislation like the Patriot Act. Had it not been for the Patriot Act, you wouldn't see the severe sentences that we have today. And and they admitted themselves, these politicians, when they voted for the Patriot Act, most of them, just about all of them, did not even read it.
That's what they say.
Right? They didn't even know it's so thick. It was like ready, it was a template. And some people speculate that they were just waiting for the right moment to introduce these things because they wanted to have these expanded powers to do whatever they want. Some of the activities are even unconstitutional, but they were waiting for the right climate to pass these laws where no one questions them after 3,000 people have been killed in a tragic event. So some of these un-American people, un-American politicians and people that have an agenda use the opportunity when the people were not even still buried during the time of mourning, and they exploited that to drive their own agenda to expand their powers, giving more powers to the FBI, like this the sneak and peek provisions, where in the Constitution we have protections against illegal search and seizure. They can't come into your house or search your places without a search warrant. They had a provision, where they could sneak into your house without a search warrant, without you being there, go into your house, find things, take things illegally, and not even tell you until 6 months later. And they were doing it. This is illegal. This is unconstitutional. How did they do it? They did it by a rubber stamp Congress that didn't even read the law, but they're so terrified of questioning anything that the administration at the time and the people that drafted the laws and most lawyers, they didn't want to seem unpatriotic. And the media went along with it because they also didn't want to seem to be unpatriotic. And for the most part, many of us and the people in this room, they're not experts in legislation or law. Most of you are here today not because you care necessarily about policy, but because policy impacted your lives. But most likely, had these policies not impacted your lives, like your loved ones have not been arrested and now incarcerated unjustly, most of you this would not even be on your radar. This would not be an issue you care because it didn't touch you. And that's where most Americans are. They don't care about policies, they don't care about what happens in Congress because it doesn't impact their lives. Now when it comes and impacts our lives, then it's too late. The work that we have to do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, we have to prepare ourselves because there's more and more legislation that's going to continue to come. The Muslim ban and other legislations are not happening just in a vacuum. There are people out there with an agenda to continue marginalizing our communities. So like they said, I want to reinforce the point that we have to register to vote. And we have to vote. It's not because, I like politics, I don't like politics. Our lives depend on it. And if you don't want to get involved in politics, guess what? Politics is involved in your life. And the unjust sentences like this terrorism enhancement, if you lie to an FBI, if you're a white kid and you lie to the FBI, you may not get in any trouble. But if you're a Muslim and you lie to the FBI and they have something against you, you're not willing to do what they want you to do, then they can increase that to 10 years. Even if it was a mistake. And that's why people say never talk to the FBI alone, ever. Why? Not because you have something to hide, because whatever you say, they can say, well, you lied. Well, who was there to back you up? Who was there to provide another story? Who was there to say that you didn't lie? That's why you have to have a lawyer there, just to protect you from our own government. And unfortunately, this is not something new. The FBI have been breaking the law in this country for decades. And it's documented because of a FOIA request and, where they release documents after many decades. Under Hoover's administration, the FBI, they had the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, where they specifically targeted minority groups and movements, especially the black community, including Martin Luther King, which we celebrate his birthday today. Back then, he was an enemy of the state. They treated this man like he was, the leader of Russia. He was the enemy of America, and the FBI treated him, and they tried to, and they had, part of their program was, what we call the 4 Ds, to disrupt, discredit, dismantle, destroy, misdirect. They would put informants in there that would pretend to be with Martin Luther King or with Malcolm X, but their whole agenda was to misdirect the movement, They put in people with the Black Panthers and misdirect the movement so they become violent, or somebody will go in there pretending to be with the Black Panthers or with Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, and then that person is there as an agent provocateur, and they would create some sort of violence, so it gives a pretext to the FBI to go in and arrest everybody. The same programs that they were doing to destroy Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they're now doing it to the Muslim community. Now the difference is the African American community said, you know what, we have to get more involved in the political process. We're going to have to start voting. They won the Voting Rights Act, and they kept fighting for the right to vote. And things started changing in that community when they started voting. It wasn't just about marching anymore, they had to vote. Now, of course, not everything is perfect, but some of the open injustice that was happening at the time started, getting less and less, and now we have more and more African Americans in government. We hardly have any Muslims in government. If we had more Muslims in government, some of these things would not be happening there, because if somebody is in the office at the FBI or in the Senate or Congress, and some of these lawmakers start bringing Islamophobic legislation, somebody's going to, hey, what's going on? This is my family. What are you guys all doing? When Senator Lott, I think he used to be in Kansas or Missouri, one time, he was the most powerful senator in the Senate. Mississippi. And one time at a party, he made a racial slur or racial joke. He lost his job out of it because of it. They came from where they were marginalized and seen as the enemy to having enough. Why? Because there were more members within the Black Caucus. Now they had a Black Caucus. That Black Caucus was needed in order to pass legislation. They had to cater to their needs. Now, if you're in the Senate and Congress and you're a black lawmaker, and then some senator is saying some racial slur about it, well, they're not going to stand for that. They can use their political power. We are being, manipulated and targeted because we don't have political influence. We don't count. That's not to mean that only Muslims are making crime or talking, or that only Muslim kids are having these fantasies about, and having this rhetoric, and that's really all it is that they were doing. They're frustrated young people, they're mad about what their government is doing overseas, and they just talk. All people talk. But the difference is you have some, they're turning on the recorder and they're selectively targeting Muslims so they can have more terrorists arrested. But Jewish kids talk too. And, there's Jewish people that also have sinister motives and other things. But they're not targeting that community and targeting them and using them as scapegoats because they know that the Jewish community would not stand for it. They know that the Jewish community is organized, that they vote in large numbers, and they're not going to allow their young people to become some pawns in some sort of, FBI plot. They're going to stand, and the Irish kids, there were people here in America that were supporting the IRA, which was considered a terrorist organization in Massachusetts, all along the East Coast, and across the country. They're doing fundraisers where they're raising money to send to a terrorist organization. No one ever bothered them. Why? Because they know those people are organized. They had unions, they were involved, they were able to meet with lawmakers. In fact, some of the Irish people were lawmakers themselves. Some of them were prosecutors, some of them were police officers, and they were somehow the gatekeepers. Not to say what they were doing is illegal, but again, it's selective, because they want to go after the weak, the people that are weak. And until now, Muslims are politically weak. We have to empower ourselves. We can't just wait until our family members are arrested for us to start participating in this process. Now, unfortunately, the Muslim leadership in America for far too long kind of ignored this area. They thought, oh, you know what, politics is corrupt, we shouldn't get involved. Oh, some of them that have this Wahhabi kind of background, oh, politics is haram, we can't engage. But as Muslims, whether you like it or not, we live in this country, we're American, we have a religious and constitutional right to advise our lawmakers, whether we're being targeted or not. So when we see bad legislation come about, whether it's against us or against another minority class or a minority group, we have to make sure we speak out against it. I mean, just religiously. In the Quran it says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Advise with truth, advise with patience. All you who believe, or you're the best of nations sent to humanity. This is not Quran, by the way, for our people of other faith. God tells us in the Quran, you Muslims are the best of nations sent to humanity. Not because you're racially superior, the criteria for being the best nation is because you join the good and you reject the evil. And then that leads to belief in God. So in order to be the best people, is that you have to practice joining good and rejecting evil. And you see evil where they target black people, or they target immigrants, or they target minorities. We have a religious duty to join campaigns that are good for our country and join campaigns that oppose bad things that are happening to our country. And not just be only concerned with ourselves. Yeah, of course, you have a cause that you have to support because you're touched by it directly and you're the best spokespeople for that. But when we see other people that are also deprived of justice, we also have to stand with them so they can stand with us. So keep that in mind. That's kind of a bigger picture as far as why it's so important. And don't think that somehow that by visiting a politician on Monday, things will change overnight. Because the other side is working overtime. So not only should we, when you want to go to talk to the lawmakers, make sure that you develop your message, you develop your talking points, you know the issue, you're well informed, but also know what your opponents are saying. Because what, we have opponents that oppose what we are advocating for. Know where they stand and be ready to refute them. In fact, even in your talking points, you can say, well, on the other side, they're saying ABC, but here's the problem with that. When you use paid informants, it's not really seeking justice, it's not really reducing radicalization, because the use of informants, 16 years after 9/11, we actually have more terrorism today than after 9/11. So obviously the system is not working. And the best people to work with as partners to reduce radicalization is the Muslim community, but how can you gain their trust when you're treating them like suspects? Who's going to want to work with you? When anybody, anytime meets with you, you start treating them like a suspect. When somebody's concerned about some behavior issues within the community because of mental illness or some bad rhetoric, you will right away go in and try to turn them into a terrorist. The parents are not going to trust you with their children in the future. It doesn't seem like the FBI and law enforcement is sincere about reducing terrorism. It doesn't seem like they're sincere. Why? Because they want to, it seems from my perspective and from our perspective, that they actually want to make sure that they capture more terrorists, not to reduce the number of terrorists, to the point that when they can't find terrorists in specific communities, they go out of their way to actually creating them. And there are many people that are mentally unstable, like the Newburgh 4 and other people that are, whether it's for poverty reasons, they are easily manipulated, especially when you start waving some cash around, and for whatever reasons, if somebody can't feed their family, or their brother or sister needs a surgery or whatever the case, and then they come up and say, I'll give you $50,000 if you pledge allegiance to Al-Qaeda, you know what? Half the country is going to pledge allegiance to Al-Qaeda at that point to get $50,000. They're like, Al-Qaeda who? They did it with the Liberty 7. They were not even Muslim, and they were calling jihadists. It's the first time, I remember one lawyer that went to visit one of the Liberty 7 people. I think her name was Baker. She was down in Miami. And when she went to visit him, she said, are your needs being met? Can I get you anything? Do you want me to get you a prayer rug and a Quran? He's like, Quran? What's that? I need a Bible. Like, what, you're not Muslim? No. We're just saying that just to get the money. So we laugh about this stuff, but there are so many plots that are like, movie, like Hollywood type plots that are being manufactured by these FBI agents. And they're finding, and actually it's like auditioning. When you audition for, America's Got Talent, or you audition for a movie, they're auditioning, they're scouting the community. Who are the most naive people out there? Who's the most desperate? And they have all the power because they're listening to all the phone calls. They know each one of those people, what problems they're facing. And then they send in these informants that all of a sudden every time they have the magical answer. Why? Because they're listening to your phone call. So they know you're going through a hardship that day, and all of a sudden the FBI informant calls you and he's able to bail you out. Oh, well, that person is there for me every time. That person must be from God. Well, they are playing God because they're listening to everything. And when people don't even have the resources, they're paying for everything to make sure that the plot goes through. When Sami Osmakash was refusing to put on the vest, the recording captured the supervisor telling the FBI agent the informant, you have to get him to put on the vest because that would be convincing in court. And the guy's telling him, no, he's not going to put on the vest. He's not that stupid. And the supervisor tells him, oh, that guy, he's so dumb, he'll, and I'm paraphrasing, for whatever kind of money, he'll put that vest on. And I knew Sammy Osmakash. I'm from Tampa, Florida. In fact, Sammy Osmakash did, in fact, we've shared some exchanges of some words in the past where he didn't like the idea that I was promoting democracy. He had his own views, but I knew he was mentally unstable. I know he was a wannabe. He was somebody who talked a lot and had a lot of rhetoric, and he was kind of a gangbanger before he became religious. So he kind of continued in that, tough guy attitude afterwards, and he would, he'd show up to the mosque and he's arguing with everybody, but he wasn't necessarily a terrorist. And they preyed on a person like that, and they even discovered that he was mentally ill, and they preyed on him and they radicalized him. They made him from somebody who was mentally unstable, who had these disgruntled ideas, for, after a year you fill him with ideas in his head, eventually, he's willing to participate in a fake plot. We have to share these stories with members of Congress. They're human beings as well, so when we're going to meet with members of Congress, of course, go in there with the idea, the person you're meeting with, yes, they're part of the government, but they're not responsible for putting your family member in jail. So, that's number one. And they're the people so don't go in there with an angry attitude. Go in there just to tell your story or share your experience. And stay focused. Of course, they're not only dealing with your issue, they're dealing with hundreds of other issues. They're dealing with healthcare, they're dealing with Trump, they're dealing with foreign policy, they're dealing with a lot. They're overworked and they're underpaid. So don't expect them that they're going to go out there and do their research for you. Don't expect you go tell them the story and they're going to magically go on Google and just be so dedicated and they're going to champion your cause. So most of the time when you hear a member of Congress giving a speech, writing on op-eds, issuing a statement, going on television, 90% of the time, even when they introduce legislation, 90% of the time they didn't write what they're saying. Somebody else wrote it for them. They're so overworked, so busy that they have other people do this work for them. So if there's an issue if there's a statement that you want them to say, draft it for them. If there's a legislation you want to introduce, draft it for them. If you want them to publish a letter or an op-ed, draft it for them. They will take it, they will add their own, if they decide to take it on or not, they'll add their own flavor to it and then publish it or then introduce it, or maybe not. They may not. But you'll have a lot better chance getting your statement out or your cause to go further if you do the work and present it to them so they can go with it further. So don't expect the staff to do the work. You do the homework for them. Share with them, some talking points, some data, but at the same time, don't give them, reams of stuff. Keep it concise, 1 to 2 pages. Obviously, whenever we go lobbying, we leave what we call the leave behind, which is basically like a 1-page summary of what we said. So that way, during the conversation, they're going to write some notes, but also, rest assured that, you have a leave behind that has your contact information, your talking points as well. Some of the other points I want to, share is we also have to make sure that we, like was said earlier, help our friends are in Congress. Yes, Keith Ellison, for example, he may not be perfect, but he's far better than just about everyone else there. He's closer to us than most of them. We can't just hammer him because he's not on board with, some of our issues. We have a better chance convincing him than some of the other members of Congress. So just because somebody's not 100% with us doesn't mean that we write them off. In fact, most of you, how many of you agree with your spouse is 100%? Raise your hand. 100%.
Okay, totally.
Yeah, because your spouse is sitting next to you. You guys, you recuse yourself from voting because you're going to be under pressure. But even with your spouses or your brothers or sisters, you don't agree with anyone 100%. Most of the time, I don't even agree with myself 100%. So don't expect members of Congress to be with you 100%. If they're 51%, that's better than being 10%. So find common ground. Maybe their issue, now going in there and trying to convince them that Islam is the way to heaven and stuff may not be the best way to talk to your lawmaker. They don't care about that. That's your religion, keep it yourself. So it's interesting that, when we are out in the community, when we're shopping at Giant or whatever grocery store that we shop at, Publix, we're normal, we're Americans who happen to be Muslim, we're just buying things, we're talking casual. But for some reason, when Muslims want to come to Capitol Hill, they want to put on the whole Muslim thing, which could be overwhelming. They'll put on the jilbab, the kufi, they'll bring the prayer beads, they'll put on the da'ud, it's already overwhelming that there's a Muslim in the guy's office. Don't come and just with an exotic, all the senses, going on, the oil beard, and it's just like, what's going on here? We're going there we don't want to be the story. We want our words. We want to pass on, the talking points, the legislation. Let's not distract them with all our exotic things. They're surprised that even a person who's not white is in their office. So if you have the hijab on, keep it just a simple thing.
I object.
Yes, I'm going to get to that. Well, sure, they should accept us as we are.
I object.
No, I'm not saying you're going to take off your hijab. But,
Not even my jilbab.
if you wear jilbab all the time, that's fine.
Yes.
But I'm talking about the people who are wearing shorts when they go to Publix. They're watching, they're just being normal. But then when they come to Capitol Hill, then all of a sudden they're, super Muslim. You put on the thobe, you're not wearing a thobe back home, don't wear it in DC. But if that's how you are all the time, be who you are. You don't have to put on some special front. But again, try to minimize the distractions. Now, of course, I am a person that says, for example, women who wear niqab, they have a right to wear what they want. I mean, of course, I'm not going to, decide for them. My wife doesn't wear niqab. However, if you know somebody like Ted Cruz, and you're going to go visit his office, maybe the niqab is not the best messenger. Because we also have to pick the right messenger. Maybe, a white Muslim with blue eyes maybe can connect better. So we also have to be strategic. Because it doesn't mean we are compromising who we are, but at the end of the day, are we trying to, what's our objective? We want to change the law. We want to change the policy for the better. We don't want to give the person that we're meeting with any type of reason to be distracted or to have objections. So even in our faith, Muhammad in the Quran, it says, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always sent the messenger from the people. If I want to advocate for something that deals with, black people, I'm not going to send a bunch of Chinese people, from China to advocate for it. Better to send the people that are directly impacted, right? Or people that know the issue, that have a stake in the game, skin in the game, as they say. So this is just human nature. Should we all have opinions about it? Yes. But having the right message, picking the right messenger is really important. And bringing allies with you. Doesn't mean the allies don't come with you. No, show that there's consensus there as well. But we have to make sure, and also the person you're talking to. So whether it's television, there's a lot of strategy that goes into this. The message, the messenger, when to deliver it, how to deliver it, what to say. And also, believe in your cause, but be ready to compromise. What I mean by that, maybe you're asking there for, a complete overhaul of the Patriot Act. But if you go in there and get one provision, that's good enough for this year. Guess what? There's more sessions in the future. Don't say like it's all or nothing. You're going to give me this or we're going to walk out. No. Take what you can, establish a relationship, and continue. And no matter what, always be thankful, regardless of the outcome. Be thankful to the lawmaker. Thank the lawmaker or their office for meeting you. At least they gave you the time. Either whether they're with you or not with you, because again, this is a long-term process. Our opponents have been working at this for a very long time. They've made these relationships. They know them on a first-name basis. They don't know you. Our opponents, some of them, may have been helping these lawmakers for years, getting reelected, year after year. You expect them all of a sudden to flip on their supporters and backers and then back us because we have the right, or our issue is a noble cause. That's not good enough. We have to also make sure that we build those relationships and help those people. And this is even in the Muslim tradition. When Muhammad ﷺ opened up Mecca, bloodless, the opening of Mecca after years of being in Medina, and Muhammad, who was our prophet, went back to Mecca. Mecca was the place of his birth. His people drove him out. He went to another city called Medina. When he returned to Mecca, he was able to reconquer Mecca without any fighting at all. There was no resistance whatsoever. And nobody was killed, there was no fighting. However, there were some of the chieftains, some of the people, the establishment of Mecca, you know, the oligarchy there. Yeah, and right now they're the Republicans. The oligarchy there in Mecca, you know, were not so happy. Muhammad ﷺ, when reconquering Mecca, they were able to seize a lot of the wealth. He distributed a lot of this wealth to those same chieftains or the oligarchy of Mecca, the ones that were his enemies. And then when his supporters, his allies that have been with Muhammad for many years, fighting with him, they're like, that seems unfair. We've been with you all these years. We fought with you. We died with you. We did all these things. But then you turn around and give these brand new people all the money. And he said, because that's what they desire. So they could cultivate their heart. Some people, money, votes, that's what they need. So sometimes by helping even your opponents to neutralize them, by helping them see the light, doesn't mean you're buying them, but to show that you're willing to support them if they do the right thing also goes a long way. We want to make more friends on Capitol Hill, not less friends, and we try to find common ground with them. And even the most right-wing people, you can try to probably, come in with the idea of how much they're spending. Some of these people that want small government, less spending, well, you're wasting a lot of money incarcerating these people. Samuel Ariane trial was $50 million, minimum. And it led to nothing. Do we want to continue to waste our money on these, these fake prosecutions, or do we want to actually use that money to prevent radicalization in a real way through rehabilitation, and when necessary, go after the real bad guys? So that's the kind of thing that we have to do. Now, there's going to be some people that you'll never win over. Once you determine that those people are never going to be with you, they're in fact your enemies, don't waste your time with them. Focus on the ones that are closer to you and work with them. And that's why data is really important. Like some of the data that you mentioned in the voting record and stuff. You have to map out who's with you all the way, who's in the middle, who's completely against you, and work on that first two groups. So if you have any questions, I'll be here to answer them, but thank you again for your time.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I disagree with one thing you said. Can you imagine?
Well,
No.
I disagree with myself, so
No, actually, your presentation was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much. I don't mean to disagree, but when it comes to the, pick your messenger, but sometimes the messenger is who she happens to be. And when I took Mrs. Hossein, who is Mohammed Hossein's wife, and his eldest daughter, to a place that I knew our congressman was meeting, and she wears, Mrs. Hossein wears niqab, and so she's the messenger, and my congressman, I think, was very taken with her story. It is possible that he never met anyone in niqab before, quite possible, but I feel that it is true that, obviously I was not born Muslim, I'm not Muslim, and when I first began to meet Muslims, I had a hard time with the hijab, and certainly a very hard time with niqab, because I didn't understand. But once you sit down one-to-one, and I talk to women, it's like, oh, now I understand. And so bringing someone who wears niqab, who has a good story, may not be so off-putting, because I feel that this is one way we have to open up to meet, we have to meet between the people, the vast majority of this country is not Muslim. And so it's important that people who are not Muslim meet Muslims. And I think that in some ways the targeting of women who, quite frankly, they never do anything illegal or violent. I mean, sorry, it's mostly white guys with guns, okay?
I'm not one of them.
You're not one of them, but that's who does the violence in this country. And so targeting women as being off-putting because of what they wear, I think is a little unfair.
Just to clarify, I don't mean to say that we're, if you have the time to meet and sit down and get to know them, that's ideal. But a lot of times it's just a short, the conversation or the meeting is so short that you don't get a chance to do all that explaining. So you don't want the whole meeting to be about the niqab and less about the legislation. So if there are opportunities for longer dialogue, of course, but again, so it's strategy, and it doesn't mean that we deny those people to have the ability, but there's a lot to overcome, and especially these more community meetings and more dialogue, I think, helps. So in your situation, it worked, and I think, that's good.
Well, of course, we're all Democrats in Albany, so it's a lot easier, we're all progressives.
And that's why I said Ted Cruz.
Well, that's
That's a little different. They want to come out with the guns.
Oh, so that's the one other thing I want to say is that you should also find out where your congresspeople are when they're in public. And it's always good to go where they are in public. Okay, sorry.
Speak loudly.
I have a question that I'm not understanding about why are the FBI spending so much time and effort and money targeting the Muslim community? Because they've been here all the time. We all came from somewhere, right? And we're a melting pot. America is a melting pot. So why are they doing the Muslim community like that now? All these people in here, nobody had any family that killed anybody. Because of the overseas, but we're also, just because the scapegoat, that's what it's like. Yeah, scapegoat.
If there's no enemy, then why are we at war?
Just to add to that, the focus on the Muslims and Islam started to increase after the fall of the Soviet Union. Before that, the FBI was focused on communist movements. They were dedicated to topple communism. They had so many campaigns against communist groups, with how they targeted Americans who were, suspected of communism. We know the history of McCarthy, etc. After the fall of the Soviet Union, and I'm not saying the whole government is like this, there are elements in the government that continues to try to find an enemy. They thrive on that. The military-industrial complex, in order to sell more weapons, justify wars overseas, American dominance around the world, and imperialism. They have to have an enemy. Why are we having so many? The war with the Soviets is over. Why do we have 900 bases around the world? To continue to justify that, a new war has to emerge. And Islam and radical Islam became the new kind of enemy that's out there. They're everywhere at any time. They have this open-ended war, authorization to go to war, especially after 9/11. And there was a group of neocons, neoconservatives. These are, far right-wing, imperial Republican type people that have been calling for expanding the war to radical Muslims. And then when they saw 9/11 happen, they took the opportunity to exploit that. They've been wanting to go to war against Saddam for many years before 9/11 happened, and as soon as 9/11 happened, they used that as a pretext to go after Al-Qaeda and Saddam. None of those hijackers were from Iraq. None of them had to do anything with Iraq. But those people wanted to continue that. In order to continue and justify wars overseas, you have to demonize the people. I mean, if Muslims are these lovey-dovey, Buddhist kind of, hug, be with everybody kind of thing, well, it's hard to bomb them. But if you show them as militants that just want to kill Americans because they hate our freedoms, that's a different narrative that they were pushing. Now, most likely a lot of and that trickles down to a lot of different institutions, including the FBI. So they see that it's absurd, that they want to, any type of movement that undermines American security, national security, they see it as a threat. And to justify that, the threat of homegrown terrorists. And again, if there's not a lot of them, then they have to somehow justify their budgets. Now, there are elements within the FBI. Some people in the FBI don't agree with these policies. Some people have been whistleblowers. So I don't want to make you think that everybody in the FBI is against us. Some people in the FBI agree with what we're saying, that some people have gone too far. There are elements within the FBI that have other agendas. They themselves have caucuses. There are elements in the FBI that are loyal to the state of Israel, and after 9/11, they used the climate that exists to go after Palestinian activists and Palestinian charities. None of these Palestinian charities had anything to do with Al-Qaeda or Bin Laden or what was happening in Afghanistan or Iraq, but these un-American actors within the U.S. Attorney's Office, like the person named Kromberg in Virginia here, they misused the climate to eliminate Palestinian activists because they want to strangle any type of support for Palestine, for the independence there, because there are groups like AIPAC and lobby groups that think the enfranchisement of Muslims in America means that, if Muslims and Arabs have more political influence in America, they're going to start asking their members of Congress to be more even balanced when it comes to Israel. They're going to ask for more even balance when it comes to the Middle East. And most people, that's a threat to them. So how do you eliminate that? You go after their leaders, you go after their activists, you strangle them, and you create a climate of fear that no one dares to speak up about this issue. And if they dare to speak out, they're going to be arrested, they're going to be discredited, they're going to be dismantled, they're going to be exposed, they're going to be accused of different things. And if all of that, if they can't find anything on them, they'll accuse them of pedophilia, rape, all types of stuff. They'll use, and it's been used against Martin Luther King. They used to send prostitutes and have these parties to lure him in. They tried it with Malcolm X. And then, to try to use it as a form of blackmail to expose them. Some of these types of people, and again, I'm not saying all of them are like this, but there are rogue elements within our government that have an agenda, and right now they see us as sitting ducks. Now, if we become united and we have political power and we vote, we say enough is enough, we're not going to target our community, or we're going to, if you, our congressman, in Florida or in Michigan, if you're not going to stand up and demand answers from the FBI, I'm going to organize people in my community to make sure you're out of office. That's going to make a difference. They're going to start freaking out. They're like, hey, you know what? Mr. FBI, hello, what's going on here? So that's, right now it's politically weak, and in the past they saw the black movement in America as a threat to the power base, and they wanted to eliminate it. The same thing with, these different elements. So right now it's the Muslims' turn. We haven't been able to rise to the challenge yet, but eventually we're going to have to work together to confront it. Using the system. We're not going to confront it with violence, obviously, in case they're listening, because they're always listening and recording. Exactly, but I'm saying that so they don't take words out of context. So, in a meeting at the Diana Center in Lanham, Ahmed Bedier said, and then you guys will advocate for me.
Let me just conclude by saying that we have some printed resolutions here. If anybody's interested in the resolutions, that's great. Come on up and help yourself. We're going to be planning tomorrow about what we can go to Congress to lobby about, and then on Monday we're going to go down and lobby. So I hope a whole bunch of you come with us, and we're going to have some fun with that. But I want to also just explain to you that you don't have to come to Washington to lobby your congressman or woman. They all have home offices, and you can do this in your home office, and you should do this in your home office. You need to get to know these people personally, so they know your name when they walk in the door. Oh, you're back again. But you don't also, because the whole war on terror is a federal issue, we tend to focus primarily on Congress. But it has all sorts of local implications, and so you also need to get to know your county, your state, your local officials, and get them involved in it also. And that's also right back in your hometown. There's really no excuse for not doing it. So now we're at 3:30. Oh, all right, one more thing. We need one more poll. How many people here are going to register to vote?
I've been voting since I was 18. I'm 63 now.
All right. Right now it's 3:30. The next panel is supposed to start at 4 o'clock. It's How to Reach the Media. It's by the two Ilarian sisters. It's going to be really good. We really need you to come back right on time to be here by 4 o'clock, okay? Because otherwise we get so far behind we're going to miss supper. So try to come back. We'll have one more announcement. Wait a minute, hold on. Don't go yet. But I will also say that we will be here if you have questions and we can talk to you.
One more announcement. I have a program in Washington, D.C. in the summer that trains young people in political leadership and some of the things that I've been talking about. So it's a week-long program. If you know anyone between the ages of 15 to 21, it's for both high school and college students. See me afterwards, but go write down this website. It's called CLA. The website is cla.unitedvoices.com. cla.unitedvoices.com. It stands for Capital Leadership Academy. It's a one week-long program. They stay here in Washington, D.C. They are trained in lobbying and political leadership, how to even run for office themselves. And we're always looking for people to nominate young people. So nominate people from your community, and when they go back to your community, they'll help you organize. They can help you do the voter registration drives, because it takes work, it takes a team. So we train these young people how to do this stuff, and they'll go back and help you with a lot of this work at home. So please nominate people for the program. Thank you.